Hi, I'm Jim Hightower, and I'm hoping that you will tune in to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour because it will turn you radioactive.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with my co-host David Feldman. Hello, David.
Hello, Steve.
Hannah is out today, but we do have the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. Hello, Ralph.
Hello, the new edition of Capitol Citizen is just out for those who want another round of unofficial journalism on Capitol Hill. Go to capitolhillcitizen.com.
We have an incredibly intriguing program today. We're spending the whole hour with Nadav Wieman, who is the executive director of Breaking the Silence. Breaking the Silence is an organization of veteran soldiers who have served in the Israeli military since the start of the Second Intifada. Most of you already know this, but for those who don't, the Second Intifada, or uprising of the Palestinian people, took place from the year 2000 to 2005. Mr. Wieman served in a sniper's team in the special forces of the Nahal Brigade and attained the rank of staff sergeant. Breaking the Silence have taken it upon themselves to expose the public to the reality of everyday life in the occupied territories through testimony from former IDF soldiers about what they saw, what they did, and what they felt. And their aim is to bring an end to the occupation. So Nadav Wieman will be coming to us from Tel Aviv. As always, we will also check in with our relentless corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber. But first, we've spoken often and urgently of the violence perpetrated against the Palestinian people. What of the soldiers who have carried out this violence? David?
Nadav Wieman is the executive director of Breaking the Silence, an organization of Israeli veterans who expose the reality of life in the occupied territories, and they work to end the occupation. Mr. Wieman served in a sniper's team in the special forces of the Nahal Brigade and attained the rank of staff sergeant. He also worked as a history and literature teacher and was the legal guardian at a home for underprivileged teens in Tel Aviv. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Nadav Wieman.
Hi, happy to be over here.
Yeah, welcome, Nadav. We're a little concerned that the Israeli human rights groups, and I think you signed on to one of their articles in the New York Times, December 13th, 2023. There were 16 human rights groups. They're getting very little coverage in the U.S. mainstream press and not all that much in the independent press. So we're very glad to have you on to lay before our listening audience a lot of information that they may not have been aware of. And I'd like to start by something we have wondered here and abroad. The death count of Palestinians in Gaza has constantly been defined by Hamas. And there's probative evidence all over that the real death count is multiple times greater than the present level of 52,000 deaths since October 7th. And so the students who demonstrated recently in front of Columbia University, their chant was, quote, 400,000 dead and you're arresting us instead, end quote. What's your estimate?
Now, I'd say it's a good question. We in Breaking the Silence, we don't have an estimate, but I can say something interesting about the numbers of Hamas. You know, until October 7th, in every operation in Gaza, in Cast-Led 2009, Protective Edge 2014, and all of the small operations in between, we took Hamas numbers of casualties and accept them as the official numbers. For example, in Protective Edge 2014, we killed 2,200 Palestinians. From that number, 293 of them were kids and infants. And nobody questioned that before. But now the state of Israel is putting a question mark every time something comes from Hamas because it's easier for us. Now, we will have official numbers many months from now. Many months after this war will end, and it didn't end at the moment, because of a couple of things. First of all, we, as I'm sure you saw and our listeners saw as well, the Gaza Strip is in rubble. Right? If I will quote one of our testifiers that fought in Gaza now and just came out, and he said that Gaza looked like Hiroshima because everything is demolished. So you have so many dead bodies under the rubble. But even more than that, you talked about the tons of bombs that we dropped over there. Now, when you have light construction like you have in Gaza, not like in my house, cement walls and all of that, and you use the firepower that we're using over there, a lot of the bodies, we will never find them. And if we'll hear what our testifiers are talking about, so one of the things that a lot of them are mentioning is smell or stench of decaying and rotten bodies, or even stray dogs eating human flesh in front of their eyes because everything is just out in the open. So the number, I'm sure it would be a lot higher. I don't know if it's 400,000. I'm not sure of that, but the number would be a lot higher.
Well, in Lancet, the British Medical Journal, months ago, they had it just under 200,000, and they thought that was a conservative estimate. This brings us to Israeli society, which usually has an open press, but in recent years it has been downgraded compared to other countries in the scale of press freedom. Why is it that even though Haaretz and some small television stations are relaying the truth and the reports that Breaking the Silence comes out with and Beth Salem, why is it that the majority Israelis don't seem to know what's going on over there when it's, as you say, only a few miles away?
Yeah, so first of all, I would like to disagree. I don't think we have free press in Israel. Our press it's not the watchdog of democracy. Yes, you have Haaretz, but how many people in Israel read that newspaper or go to Haaretz website? The majority of Israelis are watching news through channels on TV or through Yediot Achronot or Israel, the big newspapers that are very, very right-wing. So the media in Israel is very right-wing, the normal mainstream media. Because over there, you won't hear voices of Palestinians. You know, not only from October 7th, but even before that, the views that I represent. You won't see people like me sitting in panels in the different talk shows or news channels. It doesn't exist. And Palestinians, they don't exist in the Israeli media, right? 21% of the citizens in Israel are Palestinian citizens of Israel. How many anchors in Israel that you have that are Palestinian citizens of Israel, right? How many channels in Israel are Arabic-speaking channels? You don't have it, right? And when Israelis would talk about the occupation, for example, not even on October 7th or the war on Gaza now, on the occupation, it will happen only when a soldier would get stabbed or a settler would get stabbed. The day-to-day routine of the occupation doesn't exist, right? But even more than that, crime inside Israel of Palestinian citizens of Israel, nobody will talk about unless somebody will get murdered. And there is a very high murder rate inside Israel, but it's almost only in Palestinian cities of Israel, right? And if we talk about Gaza, so Israelis are seeing Gaza only through the scope of the IDF spokesperson view. That's it. When in newsroom in Israel, since October 7th, it's on steroids, right? Israelis are seeing only videos in black and white from drones, and you see like a targeted killing or something like that. It's very sterile. You don't see the lines of hungry kids in Gaza. You don't see amputees. You don't see the videos that every adult or teenager around the world can see in your news channels of blown up bodies of children, of bereaved families in Gaza. It doesn't exist in Israeli media.
Nadav, 20% of Israeli population is composed of Arab Israelis, and they have a few members of the Knesset. And some of these Arab Israelis have lost relatives in Gaza after October 7th. Are they trying to speak up, or are they just keeping a guarded silence, both in the Knesset and where they live in Israel?
I've got to say that the Palestinian citizens of Israel, they try to speak up, but the problem is, let me give you an example. I used to be a high school teacher. My wife, she's a high school teacher. Palestinian citizens of Israel that are teachers since October 7th, if they would post an emoji of a smiling face on their social network, they could be arrested. And it's not just an example I invented, it really happened. A student, a Palestinian citizen of Israel student, posted her making a shakshuka, like an omelet, and a smiley face, and she was arrested for incitement, right? A kindergarten teacher posted a verse from the Quran, not even about jihadi case, nothing about that. She was arrested for incitement and she got fired, right? So in Israel, if you're a Palestinian citizen of Israel, shut up, right? Because our police, which is Itamar Ben-Gvir's police, right, the extreme right wing, a Kahanist, a supporter of terror, is the minister in charge of internal security. now we'll arrest you and you will get fired, right? And if in your workplace you spoke Arabic too loud, or even in buses, I see it in Tel Aviv, somebody will jump on you, right? So the fact that they are civilians just like me, they don't have the same rights. Well, there are a couple of kinds of civilians in Israel. And if you're Palestinian citizens of Israel, you are quite low, right? And yes, they try to speak. And yes, there are protests. But the protests where Palestinian citizens of Israel are holding signs or just photos of Palestinian kids that got killed in Gaza, standing in Haifa, right, in the northern part of Israel, they get beaten severely and arrested by the police, right? My wife and her friends would do the same thing here in Tel Aviv and they won't get arrested because they're Jewish. They're from Tel Aviv.
Let's talk about another subject that some observers here are wondering about. How could the most sophisticated border security apparatus, technologically and human intelligence on the Gaza border, collapse on October 7th, opening the border to the Hamas assault that day? If that border security held, all that has happened since might not have happened, spreading into Lebanon and Syria and the Iran situation, the West Bank. Netanyahu's opposing an official investigation. There's some resistance to that, we understand, in the security world of Israeli intelligence. Can you tell our listeners, how could this collapse have occurred? Was it a blunder or was it more calculated?
Doesn't matter how much fences, ditches, outposts, cameras, weapon you have, you will never have full protection. But the problem over here is different. And the reason October 7th happened is because two main reasons. First of all, what Benjamin Netanyahu invented, it's called managing the conflict, which means that we're not going to solve the conflict. He doesn't want it because then nobody will vote for him. So how you manage the conflict? We continue the siege that we have on Gaza. We'll give them crumbs, meaning 2 or 3 nautical miles for fishing, 10,000, 20,000 work permits inside Israel. And then they will keep their heads above water. And then we control them, and we don't need peace agreement, another Oslo agreement. We don't need to speak with the Palestinian Authority, nothing. Then, when we are managing the conflict like that, we can build more settlements in the West Bank. We can do the Trump initiative and the guns deal with the Emirates and the normalization with Saudis and all of that. And you don't need to think about Palestinians. But the problem is, Palestinians, they want freedom, right? And we are oppressing them. And we have military regime over the Palestinian territories since June of 1967. And Palestinians, it doesn't matter that, some of them will get work permits. You have some of them, which Hamas, which is a terror organization that wants to break that siege. But when you fell in love in managing the conflict, you think you can do whatever you want. And then the other reason is that we fell in love in what we thought we have superior firepower, superior technology, right? We had a huge fence and sensors and cameras and machine guns mounted on cameras around the Gaza Strip and automatic vehicles driving over there and microphones and all of that. But that's nothing, right? Because the minute you break the barrier, the fence above ground, that's it, right? The IDF positions, bases around the Gaza Strip, they weren't bases that were supposed to be under fire. They weren't planned and built like that, that they would be like a fortress, right? That as a soldier, you can fire from within, you are protected. No. They were built as places where IDF soldier can sleep. That's it. And in those bases, we had makeshift of units that didn't spoke with one another, that didn't even train what to do when there would be an invasion. And that's important, let's talk about numbers. Around the Gaza Strip, on the Gaza border, on October 7th, that morning, we had about a platoon of tanks and about 400 soldiers, okay? In the West Bank, guarding the settlements over there, the morning of October 7th, we had 23,000 soldiers. And that is the priority of this government, protecting settlers, even they're committing settler terror, when they're murdering Palestinians, burning their field, burning all of that, they will get protected. The kibbutzes on the Gaza border weren't protected at all. Why? Because settlers are the most privileged part of our society, and we have a settler-led government, an extreme right-wing government. So it wasn't only a failure of the intelligence that didn't keep track of what's going on with Hamas, it was our government led by Benjamin Netanyahu, believing that we can manage the conflict, that we don't need to speak with Palestinians, that we don't need to solve anything. And if I'm quoting now Bezalel Smotrich, our finance minister, he said that the PA is a liability and Hamas is an asset. Why Hamas is an asset? Because that's the problem you introduce into the Palestinian society, right? You say all of the Palestinians are terrorists. We don't need to negotiate, right? The PA is a problem. And why the PA is a problem? Because the PA wants peace. The PA wants a Palestinian state, right? The PA wants to speak with us. That's why they are a problem and Hamas are an asset. Our finance minister, that's what he said. And that derives from the doctrine of managing the conflict. So it wasn't only a catastrophic failure of our secret service and the Mossad and Shabak and all of that. It was a catastrophic failure of years in Israel believing that we can do whatever we want.
We've been talking with Nadav Wieman, the executive director of Breaking the Silence, which is a courageous organization of veteran soldiers who are trying to get the truth out about what's happening in the occupied territories, both Gaza and the West Bank. The present situation, Nadav, in Gaza is beyond catastrophic. It's no longer a humanitarian crisis. There's starvation. People are dying because they can't treat wounds. They can't treat disease. The Israeli military broke the ceasefire and has embargoed all entry of humanitarian aid trucks, which are lined up in the hundreds, we understand, paid for by the American taxpayer. Isn't there at least a compassionate sense among more Israelis now that the suffering by Gaza families who had nothing to do with October 7th, babies, infants, children, mothers, fathers, grandfathers, grandmothers, deserves the entry of these humanitarian trucks? And what is Breaking the Silence doing on that front?
Yeah, so I've got to say that we are witnessing now the tip of a long process of dehumanization of Palestinians in the Israeli society. Again, it's not from now. We are dehumanizing them because think of that. If you need to control 5 million Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza that don't want your control, and you do it by military regime, the only possibility you do that soldiers just like me would run after they finish high school, go stand in a checkpoint and raid homes and drag kids from their beds in the middle of the night. You need to dehumanize Palestinians. And Palestinians, you can see how they're referred in the Israeli media. And you can see how, again, I used to be a history teacher, how they're referred in our history books. There isn't any Palestinian national movement. There isn't any Palestinians, basically. They're referred as street gangs in our textbook in classrooms. I don't know if you know, but there's a law in Israel in each classroom, in every high school in Israel, you need to put next to the board a map. You need the symbol of Israel, the national anthem, and a map of Israel. But a map, and that's by law, without the green line and without the name of Palestinian villages or town, unless there was a Jewish presence over there during the Roman Empire time. Which means that you sit for 6 years in high school and you see in front of you a map without the green line and without Palestinian names over there. From the river to the sea, Israel. And Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt are blurred. So Israel looks like an island, right? This is what you see. This is what we teach our kids, right? We say we are a villa in the jungle. That's super racist. Like, there's a jungle around us? No, right? We are the only democracy in the Middle East. We were the only democracy in the Middle East for about 6 months, just before the occupation started. And this is what you have in your head. And again, in the Israeli media, when Palestinians are referred, they are all criminals or terrorists, all of that. And then October 7th happened. And the Hamas atrocities of October 7th, mass rape, mass kidnap, mass killing Israelis and foreigners, right? Shooting indiscriminately in the kibbutzes, murdering everyone, which was horrible. October 7th for me was a very traumatic day. First of all, Breaking the Silence, we lost 2 of our activists. Chaim, that was murdered in Kibbutz Cholit, and Shachar, my very good friend, and my officer from Special Forces, was killed in Kibbutz Be'eri while he was defending the medical clinic for 7 hours until he ran out of ammunition. He fought bravely. And I was with my kids in the shelter all day long, and it was chaos over here. And that amplified the dehumanization of Palestinians over here. Do all of the Gazans committed atrocities on October 7th? I don't think so. No, it's impossible, basically, right? But Israelis are referring to all of the Gazans now, just like they are, I don't know, Sinwar or, I don't know, like an anarchy terrorist, which is just not true. even in the IDF, you have laws saying that you're not supposed to shoot at women and kids, right? You're not supposed to shoot at unarmed Palestinians, but we do it. We do a lot of it, right? From October 7th until the ground invasion started on the 27th of October 2023, you have 20 days that hundreds of thousands of reservists were in their bases watching in loops all of the videos, because Hamas, they had like GoPro cameras on them. It was like so many videos, and from the Nova festival party. And then they entered Gaza. And in Gaza, they got commands, every man military age shoot to kill. What's military age? 15, 16, 17, 18, 75, 85? What's military age? And why every man shoot to kill? You're supposed not to shoot at everyone on sight, right? But our soldiers were told that every Palestinian you see in the areas that you are invading are suspected terrorists or terrorists, because we threw leaflets from the air, told them to evacuate. And if they're over there, you can shoot and kill them. And then when those soldiers got back home, everybody was so proud of them because they defended Israel. Maybe they released our hostages. Most likely they killed some of our hostages, right? And everybody's are praising them, and their commanders are telling them that the commands that they are getting are kosher, are legitimate. So they don't think they did something bad. And that's the thing about soldiers. It goes both ways. What you do on the ground inside Gaza, but when you get back home, you are a mini IDF spokesperson. You say, yes, everything was legitimate. We killed only terrorists and all of that. In every second house, there is weapons in Gaza and all of that. Now, it's not true. I've got to say, our testifiers are talking about something very different.
Netanyahu has often said that Hamas, which he bragged about before October 7th, supporting and helping funding from the Gulf because Hamas was against a two-state solution, which is favored by the Palestinian Authority. And then October 7th happened, and he started calling Hamas an existential threat. Hamas had a few thousand guerrillas with some rifles and rocket grenades hiding in the tunnels. It never was an existential threat, but he's exaggerating it in order to justify falsely stating that there are command and control centers in every little place in Gaza, even hospitals and clinics, so the Israeli military can blow them up. What's your view of the Hamas threat to Israel? He said he wants to destroy Hamas so it's never again a threat to Israel, but it was only a threat when the border security apparatus collapsed. It was never really a threat to Israel. Can you give our listeners some estimate of what's left of Hamas? We never hear about Israeli casualties in Gaza because they are so minimal, and a lot of them are collapse of buildings that they were in, accidents or friendly fire. But there have been very few casualties. We never hear about any Hamas counterattack. Was there any threat to begin with other than October 7th with the border collapse? And what's the threat now?
Let me correct you. Hamas, it's not a street gang. They have 40, 50,000 before October 7th, 50,000 soldiers, and they are heavily armed. And they managed to pull out October 7th, which was a very sophisticated attack. Some of Hamas operates drove more than 20 minutes on motorcycles inside Israel, entered the classified base, and were on the way to connected to the intelligence core mainframe and stealing files from over there with maps and aerial photographs that they got, I don't know where, after they knocked down entire outposts on the Gaza border. And so it's not a street gang. It's an enemy. It's a serious enemy. And they have a very important card up their sleeve, and that's the tunnels. You don't have any Western army that had to face the tunnel system just like Hamas has in Gaza. And that's a huge thing. And by the way, you don't need to be a military tactician to understand that when a standard army with tanks and APCs and all of that is entering into densely urban areas, when you don't control the subground, all of the tunnels, guerrilla will always inflict a lot of casualties to a standard army. And this is exactly what happened in Gaza. Hundreds of Israeli soldiers, actually more than 400 soldiers, died after the ground invasion. Now, I know that the scope of the American society, 400, but it's a lot for Israelis, right? And more than 800 soldiers died since October 7th. That's the highest amount of soldiers that died, right? On October 7th, 350 soldiers died. That's numbers that we never encountered. In the first week of the Yom Kippur War in 1973, 300 soldiers died. Okay, so in about 3 hours, 350 soldiers died on October 7th. So that's what a huge, huge blow. So Hamas, they are quite a force and trained and they are organized. Yes, they are not a standard army like we. They don't have a long-range missile and F-35 and all of that, but they're dangerous. And I've got to say that at the moment, we don't really know how many operates remain to Hamas. Israel estimates about between 20 and 30,000 Hamasniks. And if you calculate, by the way, the number, Israel is saying that we killed more than 50,000 Palestinians and only 20,000 of them were Hamasnik. It means that we killed a whole lot of civilians. And I've got to say something, by the way, Hamas is hiding and using all of the infrastructure in Gaza, meaning even hospitals. And exactly 35 minutes ago, we bombed the European hospital in Khan Yunis, tried to kill Muhammad Sinwar, the brother of Yahya Sinwar, that is now in control of Hamas. It's all of the headlines now in Israel. I don't know if we managed to kill him, but we bombed the hospital. And by the way, we bombed the hospital yesterday, killing a journalist, a Hamas journalist with a suicide drone. So for Israel, for us, the fact that Hamas is moving around inside civilians or hiding behind civilians doesn't stop us. We fire and we kill them. And let me quote one of our testifiers, by the way, that said that before October 7th, collateral damage in an operation is supposed to be zero, right? You want to kill that individual and you don't want to kill anyone around him, right? And since October 7th, collateral damage for a very low-ranking Hamasnik, it's 15. Or if I quote the testifier, for a Hamas truck driver, collateral damage 15. 15 human beings, civilians that you know they are innocent, but you say, yeah, the target is valuable. But Hamas truck driver, I don't think it's a valuable target, right? One of the reasons why the numbers of casualties are so high. And yeah, Hamas is using civilian infrastructure, obviously, but telling now something that everybody knows, where the headquarters of the IDF is located, you know? In the heart of Tel Aviv, in the middle of Tel Aviv. And you know where Southern Command is located? In the heart of Beersheba. And you know where Northern Command is located? In the heart of Tzfat, right? And I can go on and on. I grew up in North Tel Aviv, and in my neighborhood there were 3 military bases, 2 of them classified, right? And it's everywhere. So saying that Hamas is using Gazans as human shields, so what do we have to say? You know, the chief of staff of the IDF is sitting in a tunnel under Tel Aviv. In the heart of Tel Aviv, there is a kindergarten 15 meters away from the fence of the headquarters of the IDF in the middle of Tel Aviv. But that's not using civilians as human shield, right? Because if you listen to what the IDF is saying, that Hamas is using Palestinians as human shield, so every time Hamas is, and that's why we can shoot at them, so every time Hamas is firing a missile on Tel Aviv or Beersheba or Jerusalem, that's okay, because you have military bases over there? I don't think so. I think civilians are out of the question, right? So for your question, no, we don't know what's the numbers of Hamas operatives that are still alive and functioning, but they are a force to be reckoned with.
Let's talk about the situation of Israeli soldiers in Gaza and the West Bank, about which you know a great deal. There is an anonymous op-ed in Haaretz on March 30, which is attributed to a senior officer in a non-reservist brigade, and he claims that in Gaza, quote, almost every IDF platoon keeps a human shield, a sub-army of Palestinian slaves. Innocent Palestinians are regularly forced by soldiers to enter houses in Gaza and make sure there are no explosives. But why is the IDF's Military Police Criminal Investigation Division opening only 6 investigations into the use of human shields? End quote. Also, the American doctors back from Gaza have X-ray evidence that the snipers have targeted infants and toddlers and shot them through the head. They have X-ray evidence of this, indicating what you implied, that there are very few rules of engagement here. And all this comes down to, what is the moral trauma on these soldiers when they go back home? And is there a mental health crisis here? And are more of them going to speak out at your forums when you travel around Israel? Do you think more of them are going to start speaking out?
Yeah, so when the first soldier came to us in December 2023 and told us about the IDF is using Palestinians as human shield, I thought it was a rogue commander. I thought it was, an isolated event. But then another soldier came and another soldier and another soldier. And then we understood it's a protocol. It's a new protocol in the IDF. It's called the Mosquito Protocol. Mosquito, it's a code name on the radio saying taking a Palestinian man and put him on him IDF uniform. And in some cases, a GoPro camera on a helmet or a GoPro camera on a chest, or even cell phone with a video call, And then soldiers were ordered to send them into tunnels to sweep the tunnels or into homes to sweep the homes so there won't be IEDs or something over there. And that's the mosquito protocol. You have another protocol called WASP. WASP protocol, Palestinian, sweeping tunnels, but this time are Palestinian working with the IDF that were brought from the West Bank. And they were told that they will get something from us, a permit, I don't know, something like that. And there's another protocol, which is called Mongoose protocol, and that is that the Shin Bet, the Secret Service in Israel, took asylum seekers, Sudanese asylum seekers from Tel Aviv and the area, and told them, we're going to enlist you, you're going to sweep tunnels, and after that, we will give you like a green card that you can work in Israel legally. Okay, because Sudanese, they're Muslim, they speak Arabic, and you have a Sudanese neighborhood in Rafah, inside Gaza, right? So they were used as well. So you had all kinds of protocols, and I've got to say that after we published that in Haaretz with our testifiers, more and more testifiers came. Then we understood it comes from all ranks, different parts of the Gaza Strip, different parts of the war, different times. Everybody said the exact same thing, the mosquito protocol. It's a protocol, right? And the amazing thing is that as a soldier, you learn about the illegal command. It's called the Nader procedure because we had the same procedure in the West Bank, but that was banned by the Supreme Court in Israel, 2007. We used to take, when you come to arrest somebody that was armed, you know that's armed Palestinian, you will take the neighbor, you tell the neighbor, you knock on the door. And the neighbor knock on the door, he will get shot, and then we will storm the house and kill that Palestinian man. So that was banned by the Supreme Court in Israel. So it's something that you learn in like basic training. You see, that was wrong. We are not doing that again. And then suddenly, October 7th happened, and we're using Palestinians as human shields. And by the way, after we published that, there was a commotion in the international community. Maybe we did a couple of press about it in CNN and Washington Post and other places and all of that. But it wasn't stopped. Actually, testifiers that just came to us a couple of weeks ago told us that they're still using it. If in the beginning it was more structured, taking that Palestinian man, making sure that he has a family in Egypt or family in the West Bank so we can pressure him. Now, we were told by soldiers that grabbing people on the street, using them as human shield. And by the way, it doesn't only stop after they sweep the tunnel, right? They live with you in the makeshift base in one of the houses that you took over in Gaza. They are blindfolded and cuffed. So you have to feed them. You have to give them water. You have to take them to the bathroom. And an individual can be a human shield for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 3 months, right? Which is crazy. Now, the soldiers that gave us testimonies, they told us that they came to their commander and said, okay, this is too much. And their commander said, listen, we lost too many dogs in the dog unit, so we're using Palestinians as human shield. Or some commander said, listen, do you prefer that you will be blown up from an IED or this Gazan? Your life are more important. And another testifier told us that his superior officer told them, let me worry about war crimes, you just execute commands. Okay? But all of those cases, coming back to what I said before, dehumanization of Palestinians for so many years in Israel, so you can feel free to use them as a human shield. And that's very coherent with one of the main, we have two main doctrines in the IDF. And one of the main doctrine is, it's called zero casualties to our soldiers. We take all of the dangerous part of being a soldier and put it on the other side, on the civilian side of the enemy. Meaning, if I want to sweep a house in Gaza, I Gaza in 2008 and 2012. So before you enter a house, maybe a tank would hit one of the walls or it fell down, or maybe a shoulder missile on one of the walls. And then you get through that wall, but you do a wet entry. So you throw a grenade, it explodes, and then you enter while firing into the room, each room, right? So you will be very protected. But if there are civilians over there, they're f***ed. And that's only one example of zero casualties to our soldiers. And that's something that every human being in Israel will recite. Say, yeah, of course our soldiers are more important, but there are laws and there is morals when you're fighting civilians out of the question. Only gunmen on both sides, the Palestinian side and our side, are supposed to fight one another, not civilians.
Before we get to the impact of breaking the silence that could occur in the United States, which I think will interest you a great deal, there are 10 to 15,000 Palestinians in Israeli jails, and the conditions are quite brutal. Some Israeli doctors in these jails have testified to that, and they're in largely without charges, and they include women and children. and they're hostages too. What is breaking the silence view of this, as the focus on hostages has been almost entirely on the hostages held by Hamas?
Yeah, so after this war started, the IDF built a makeshift detention center in Sde Eman detainee base, just outside of the Gaza Strip. And immediately testifiers started to come to us from over there because it basically became a torture camp. And we uncovered that in the Israeli and international media a couple of months ago. And I say torture camp because they were really torture camps. In Guantanamo Bay, in I don't know how many years it's open, not a lot of prisoners died over there. But in our prisons, more than 40 Palestinians lost their lives since October 7th. Some of them because they were amputated by medics, not by doctors, and not using sedatives. Some of them were chained to beds for months on end, blindfolded and cuffed. And horrific thing happened over there, and obviously a lot of violence. Again, dehumanization of Palestinians. Because Israelis, their guards were told that if you have Palestinian prisoners, it means that all of them murdered the Israelis on October 7th.
We've had on our show Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now, Standing Together. A couple times we had Gideon Levy from Haaretz. But you bring a different dimension to American public opinion. So we'd like to ask you the following questions. Do you connect at all with Veterans for Peace in the U.S.?
We have amazing partners in the US. They are called Common Defense. It's an organization of American veterans against the American never-ending war and a couple of progressive goals. And in last July, actually, we did an advocacy trip together at the Hill in Washington. While Bibi was addressing both House of Congress, we did a series of meetings with congressmen and women and Senate members. And actually, while Bibi was speaking in Congress, I was speaking in a room next to him where more than 12 congressmen and women from the Democratic Party came to hear what is going on in Gaza, not the propaganda that Bibi was talking on the floor.
Speaking of that speech by Netanyahu for Congress, as you know, about a month before that, 6 prominent Israelis sent a letter to members of Congress urging him to disinvite Netanyahu. They include Ehud Barak and a former high security official, one of the leading authors in Israel. What's the nature of the establishment opposition to Netanyahu?
That's a bit complex, but I think that one of the problems that we have in my political camp is that people want to go back to the old status quo when we just occupied Palestinians without the catastrophic death tolls in Gaza and the way we are fighting now, because they thought that would bring us security. The problem is that as long as there's occupation, we won't have security. Israelis are not safe since June of 1967 when we occupied the West Bank and Gaza and until now. And I've got to say that what is happening in the last couple of weeks and months in Israel are astonishing, right? We have the old institution, like the old generals and parliament members and all of that, calling for a ceasefire and releasing our hostages. The latest polls show that more than 70% of Israelis are pro-ceasefire and ending the war on Gaza to release our hostages, meaning even Benjamin Netanyahu's voters, they want to end this war. And just a couple of days ago, Boogie Elon, which used to be the commander-in-chief of Seret Matkal, our Delta Force, and then commander-in-chief of the IDF, and then the defense minister under Bibi said that what Bibi is sending our soldiers to do in Gaza now, it is war crimes and ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Boogie Elon, just a couple of years ago, called Breaking the Silence called me a traitor because I talked about the exact same thing that we're doing in Gaza. And now he understands it as well. We came to a point when this institution, defense complex institution, is against this war because the command that IDF soldiers are getting at the moment, the craziest commands that we ever had. Only this week, the war cabinet minister, Bezalel Smotrich, said that we are going to occupy Gaza. Doesn't matter if they release our hostages, we're not going to give the land back. And a parliament member from the Likud party, Moshe Saada, said, now this time we are going to annihilate Gazans, Hashmada in Hebrew. That's what happened to my grandfather in Poland in the 30s and the 40s, right? This is what our government is speaking at the moment. So yes, Commander-in-Chief of the IDF, including Ehud Barak and Boogie Elon, but also the former head of the Shin Bet, Ami Ayalon, are openly talking against Bibi and this crazy right-wing extremist government. And that shows you that the space in Israel to speak more critical about what we're doing over there is getting bigger. And in the last couple of weeks, we had letters of 940 Air Force personnel to stop this war because we were killing our hostages. And then hundreds of other soldiers, and then teachers, and then government workers. You had a variety of letters, people signing letters saying, let's end this war, ceasefire now, leave in Gaza because we need to release our hostages and stop all of the bad things that we are doing over there.
Before we let Steve and David have their question, Nadav, how could people find out more about breaking the silence? You must have a website, and you invite peace-loving people from all over the world to be knowledgeable about what your courageous members are doing. It's not easy under Netanyahu to do what you're trying to do as you go around Israel and speak to forums and universities. Could you give our listeners slowly the website?
Yeah, so our website is breakingthesilence.com, but you also can find us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and Instagram, where we published all of the testimonies that we get in Hebrew and in English, and about what's going on the ground. And I've got to say that we're not only doing our work, the majority of our work is here in Israel, 80% of it in Hebrew and in Israel, but also we work in English in Israel or abroad. And for example, our activists did a campus tour in the US just a couple of weeks before all of the encampment started. And it was amazing because we did East Coast. And in all of the universities, in the hall was sitting the pro-Palestinian students and the pro-Israeli students. And they told us in the end of the lecture, and they said, listen, it's the only time that we're sitting in the same room together. Right? Because breaking the silence, our message is a complex message saying that we're Israeli patriots, we love Israel, we want to defend Israel, but Israel, not the West Bank and Gaza. And we think the occupation is harming Israel. And by the way, I think if you want to be labeled as pro-Israeli, you need to be pro-peace. And you need to see Palestinians as human beings. That's pro-Israel, not the fascist pro-Israel, pro-settlements and pro-apartheid regime in the West Bank. That's not pro-Israel. That's against Israel.
Do you expect your ranks to swell with returning reservists? Do you expect more reservists to join your group?
Yes, from October 7th, we have a flood of the new testifiers. And by the way, when we return to fight in Gaza now, in the 18th of March, just now, when we broke the hostage deal, we had more reservists coming to speak with us, but also on duty. Conscript soldiers coming to speak with us because now everybody in Israel understands that Bibi is slaughtering Gazans only to keep his government. That's it. Not to release our hostages, not to fight Hamas, only to keep him in government.
Well, apart from the war in Gaza, he's pretty despised. Most Israelis, he wanted to weaken the judicial system and its independence, huge rallies against that. He's under prosecution by Israeli prosecutors for corruption. And they still fault him for not protecting them with a secure border on October 7th. Isn't that right?
Yeah, before October 7th, we had the biggest protest in Israel. We had hundreds of thousands of Israelis marching on the streets every weekend and every midweek against the judicial overhaul that Bibi and his friends tried to do. By the way, the judicial overhaul was funded by two American citizens that established an organization called Kohelet Forum, that they are ultra-libertarians, basically, and they trying to make Israel a crazy, crazy, crazy place. And I've got to say that the same people that protest against Bibi before October 7th, they came with us to the West Bank by the busload every week. Because when you protest week after week in Israel, protecting the Supreme Court, protecting the democracy in Israel, you suddenly start to understand that what we're doing in our backyard for the past 58 years, it's undemocratic at all. We in Breaking the Silence said, oh, okay, we have a wave of like an awakening in the left wing or center left in Israel, and maybe the occupation is about to be over, and then October 7th happened. And that was really devastating for the peace camp in Israel.
I wonder, given all the activities that Breaking the Silence is involved in, whether it's time for you all to write a book for the American audience. Is there a book in the works?
Actually, everything we publish in Hebrew and in English. And for the last couple of years, we're writing a book about Gaza, by the way. And we were supposed to publish that last year, but then a lot of things happened. And we will publish it. But we're publishing our testimonies all of the time. Again, go to our website, breakingthesilence.com, and you can read everything.
Very good. Steve?
My question was going to be, Nadav, about the loneliness of being a dissenter in Israel, but it sounded like the tide is turning. But tell me, give us a little insight into your everyday life dealing with the people who are getting their information, like you say, from the right-wing press, and you being is that a lonely position?
Yes and no, I've got to say. First of all, the anti-occupation camp in Israel is getting bigger and bigger all of the time. And the protest against the judicial overhaul before October 7th, there was an anti-occupation bloc, a very big one. And, people are coming to our tours, to our lectures, to our panels. We work a lot with, I know it's going to sound weird, with the pre-military academies in Israel. In Israel, you can postpone your army service for a year and do a leadership program to become an officer in the IDF. Those are pre-military academies, and we have more than 120 of those. And we work every year with about 70 of them. We take them to the field, we do lectures, we meet them. And after October 7th, that didn't stop as well. You know why? They invited us and they said, after October 7th, I came to the first lecture to a pre-military academy and I thought it's going to be a fist fight. Nobody in Israel wants to speak with us. And then a guy raised his hand and said, Nadav, can you please not talk about the West Bank and talk only about Gaza? Because in the Israeli media, we don't hear what's really going on in Gaza. And in a couple of months' time, we're going to join the IDF. And we did in December, January 2023, 2024, we did about 40 pre-military academies, thousands of 18-year-olds, right? So, yes, when I take a taxi in Tel Aviv, I won't tell the taxi driver that I walk in breaking the silence. Yes. And still, when we come to family dinners, my mother would tell me, Nadav, don't speak about breaking the silence. And I tell him, I'm the executive director. I'm doing this for 14 years. And argue, it's a good argument, right? And yeah, I can say that after October 7th, I lost even more friends. And I heard genocidal talk in every cafe, grocery shop, supermarket, and on the beach. You hear genocidal talk. And that's hard. That's difficult, right? But I've got to say that at the same time, it doesn't matter how hard it would be. It doesn't matter if they put us in jail or close our organization like they are trying to do now. They're passing legislation against human rights organizations in Israel at the moment. If the option is to be silent, that's not an option for me. We have to speak. I have to speak because I did it. I stood in checkpoint. I fired at Palestinians. I arrested them. I invaded their homes. I fought in Gaza. And I have to speak because I'm an Israeli citizen and I believe in a democracy. And I have to speak because I'm a Jewish man. And I know what my family endured in Europe, right? So I have to fight for the freedom of everyone. So maybe it's hard, but that's what we need to do.
David?
Netanyahu is promising to keep Israel safe. So let's talk about accountability for Netanyahu. What has he accomplished in the way of security since October 7th? Is Hamas still firing rockets into Israel from Gaza? Are the rocket attacks from Hamas as lethal as they were before October 7th? Is Hamas weaker today than it was a year ago? And more importantly for me, is Hamas as popular with the Palestinians in Gaza today as they were before October 7th?
First of all, Netanyahu says that he's Mr. Security, that he is the only one that can bring security, he's the only one that knows. The biggest terror attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust happened on October 7th, happened under Netanyahu, right? Netanyahu would say, I will defeat Hamas and and all of that. But first of all, you cannot defeat an idea, okay? And second of all, so the Hamas would fill up their ranks in the next couple of years, right? Or months, or I don't know what. And maybe Gaza, you have more Gazans now, they don't like Hamas and all of that. Okay. But the question is, what is the cost? And if Benjamin Netanyahu destroyed Israel, right now, when I'm flying abroad, right, and I meet people, and I used to say, for no problem, I'm Israeli, I'm a peace right, I'm a human rights activist. Now everybody are looking at me like that crazy country that committed the atrocities that is happening now in Gaza. My army was sent over there to do all of that. My friends and family did that. And so Benjamin Netanyahu, I cannot even say in the short range he brought security to Israel. But in the long range, when you think about what he did to Israel, he destroyed his country, he turned us apart. because his supporters are now, you've got the exact same thing. Right? You have Fox News with Channel 14, alternative facts, they call it, or fake news, or all of that. You know, my neighbors, I live in South Tel Aviv. My neighbors over here, which I love them a lot, they believe that it was an internal betrayal of officers inside the IDF and the Shin Bet that opened the gates for Hamasniks and gave them all of the information who to kill. They really believe it because this is what Benjamin Netanyahu and the right wing in Israel is saying. So Benjamin Netanyahu would avoid his accountability to what happened on October 7th. And by the way, the chief of staff of the IDF, Herzi Halevi, resigned. Good. He failed. The head of the Shin Bet is going to resign in, a week and a half, if I'm not mistaken? The head of Central Command resigned. The security minister, Gallant, was kicked off. Everyone left beside Bibi. Accountability reached until his desk and then stops. He's not accountable for anything. And one of the biggest problems that we have is that the media in Israel are not really speaking, Bibi is not speaking with Israeli media. He gives only interviews to Fox News, by the way. And so they're not questioning him a lot, not talking about his failures enough. His failures, not like October 7th, his failures. And I've got to say that he doesn't believe that he's in charge of anything. If you ask Bibi, it's the army's fault. It's the Shin Bet's fault. It's the kibbutzniks' fault. It's the left wing fault. It's I don't know whose fault. Right? So accountability and Bibi doesn't go together.
Francesco?
My question is there light at the end of the tunnel for Israeli politics? There is substantial opposition to Netanyahu among Israeli and American liberals, but is there any alternative figure who could plausibly win power that would pursue peace with the Palestinians?
In the coming elections.
Yeah, so the elections are supposed to be in the end of 2026, if there will be elections, right? Because they're trying to change all of the laws and make our democracy disappear because Bibi is behaving like a dictator, basically, or wannabe dictator. Yes. I've got to say, you touched one of the most important subjects. We don't have leadership in my political camp. Unfortunately, people thought that Benny Gantz would be the next leader, but Benny Gantz said a couple of days ago, if somebody's talking about a Palestinian state, he's lunatic, and he said that the settlements are good for us and all of that. He was always right-wing. And Yair Lapid, I don't know what happened to him. He disappeared, basically. And the only leader that is emerging at the moment is Yair Golan, he's the head of the Labour Party in Israel. And he was a general in the IDF, and he did amazing thing on October 7th. He just went out of his house, went down south, grabbed a weapon and a uniform from a base, and fought and saved people from the Nova Party because he said, this is what you need to do. Nobody commanded him to do that. He was a retired general. Right? But he's also one of the most elegant speakers against Bibi Netanyahu, and he's not afraid to speak against him. But he's also not afraid to march in protest in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And he was beaten by police, by Ben Gvir's police. And he's talking about a joint Palestinian-Israeli struggle inside the Palestinian citizens of Israel. And he's talking about ending the occupation. So I think that would be one of our more prominent leaders in the years to come.
Well, Nadav, before we close, just for the record, 64 members of the House of Representatives, Democrats, during the last days of the Biden administration, demanded that Biden tell Netanyahu to let foreign reporters into Gaza, including American reporters and Israel reporters, so they can report independently. And AIPAC would not support that. They basically support keeping American journalists out of Gaza. And just for your information, the major press outlets, New York Times, Washington Post, BBC, Agence Presse, Associated Press, 75 of these groups put a full-page ad a few months ago in the New York Times demanding access to Gaza. And this is still not being pursued by the State Department or the White House, just for the record. AIPAC wouldn't even support airlifting horribly burned Palestinian infants to ready and able U.S. hospitals. They wouldn't even do that. So I thought you'd like to know that.
I've got to say that there is a ban of Israeli journalists to enter Gaza more than 20 years now, right? And I believe we all understand the reason. When journalists would enter inside, so it's not only the IDF in charge of information coming out, because all of the journalists that went inside since October 7th were embedded in IDF units, Israeli and international, right? And we don't want the information of what is really happening in Gaza to go out. And one thing about AIPAC, AIPAC doesn't represent, I don't think it really represents Jewish Americans. And obviously, it doesn't represent me. I think AIPAC is one of our biggest problems because it stopped voices like me. There is an amazing group called J Street in the US that we work a lot with. And they are liberal Jewish Americans, very progressive, amazing. And I believe they are the true voice of Jewish Americans. But again, our problem is that as AIPAC is so powerful and suppresses voices like me that are coming from Israel and brings only other voices that supports Bibi Netanyahu's government.
Before we close, can you give the website once more? And thank you very much.
Our website is breakingthesilence.com. Follow us on Twitter or follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you very much for the time and for this amazing conversation.
And the best of luck to you.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Nadav Wieman. We will link to Breaking the Silence at RalphNaderRadioHour.com. Now, let's check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber.
From the National Press Building in Washington, D.C., this is your Corporate Crime Reporter Morning Minute for Friday, May 16, 2025. I'm Russell Mokhiber. Legislation moving through the Congress would fold the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, or PCAOB, into the Securities and Exchange Commission. The bill provides no funding for the operations of the PCAOB once folded into the SEC, thus effectively putting the agency out of business. Last week, a group of former SEC officials and PCAOB Advisory Committee members wrote to congressional leaders urging defeat of the legislation. If adopted, the bill would have a devastating impact on the accuracy and reliability of financial reporting upon which investor protection and the health and integrity of our financial markets rely, they wrote. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scrovan, along with David Feldman and Ralph. And I want to thank our guests again, Nadav Wieman. For those of you listening on the radio, that's our show. For you podcast listeners, stay tuned for some bonus material we call the Wrap-Up. We'll have a little bit more from Nadav. And also, we featured Francesco DeSantis with In Case You Haven't Heard. A transcript of this program will appear on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour Substack site soon after the episode is posted.
For more from Russell Mokhiber, go to corporatecrimereporter.com. The producers of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour are Jimmy Lee Wirt, Hannah Feldman, and Matthew Marin. Our executive producer is Alan Minsky.
Our theme music, Stand Up Rise Up, was written and performed by Kemp Harris. Our proofreader is Elizabeth Solomon.
Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Thank you, Ralph.
Spread the word, people. Get more radio stations to carry the program in your community.
You say we have no choice. Say you're just one person, and who will hear your voice? Don't let them fool you. You have the power in your hand. I'm only trying to school you.